What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from JJ01 back with another retro Yu-Gi-Oh format, and in this video I'm going to be doing something that I don't normally do, where I'm going to be jumping ahead in my coverage of Yu-Gi-Oh formats to discuss an Android tournament. Now, if you don't know, at this point in my channel, we're about to dive in to the release of Pharaoh's Servant, which will introduce a lot of cool new cards and lead directly into a format called Imperial format, which I am excited to cover. And there should be a guide going over all the new cards that Pharaoh's Servant adds to the format coming soon later this week. But Android format is actually the format that comes soon after that with the release of Labyrinth of Nightmare. And it's a bit more popular than the formats that I've been covering lately, so it should be fun when I eventually get there. But there was recently a tournament in this format, so I figured that since that tournament just wrapped up and I participated in it, I figured I'd sort of talk about what this format implies about the Android metagame and sort of provide a brief teaser for my eventual coverage of that format. But before diving in to the tournament coverage itself, if you missed my announcement video that happened a couple days ago, we are actually holding a tournament of our own in the YGO0 Discord, and it will be covering a format called Treasure Format, which I just wrapped up my coverage on a little while ago. It's a format that's largely underexplored, and I don't think there's ever been a sort of tournament held in it, so I'm really excited to see how that goes, and I hope to see as many of you there as possible. It should be really fun. In addition, if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe. I'm going to be diving into Pharaoh's Servant, as I said, very soon, so that should be a very fun video, and if you're subscribed, you can get notified as to when that comes out. In addition, I mentioned the YGO0 Discord server, but if you're not already a part of it, check out the link in the description below. It's a great place to find duels in all these obscure and old historical formats, so definitely check it out if you're interested. And lastly, if you enjoyed this video, as always, please do leave a like down below. It really helps out the channel a lot. But now that that's all the way, let's talk about this tournament. So this tournament is called Jinzo Jackers 1, and I really hope I don't get demonetized for that. But you know, it was just a fun name for the tournament, and it was all around a pretty fun tournament. There were only 16 people in it, and the deck types were largely uniform, being Tomato Control, which is just, you know, sort of the term for this sort of good stuff beatdown deck, where, you know, you're playing 3 Mystic Tomatoes to fetch out recruiters like Sangan and Witch, potentially fetching out like a Mass Sorcerer, and you're playing all the other good stuff cards like Jinzo and the major beaters of this format, which are Gemini Elf, Bazoo the Soul Eater, and Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer. So, you know, there are changes to these lists, of course, you know, depending on the specific builds of the deck. But it seems like this deck is widely regarded as the best deck in this format, and like pretty much the main deck that you'll be facing anytime you play a game in this format. There are other sorts of strategies, like I know Earth Beatdown is one that has been somewhat popular in the past, just sort of experimenting with that. But overall, you know, Tomato Control is the best deck and is what sees play. And you know, there was one person on a deck called Ladybug Control, which I assume is playing like 4-star Ladybugs of Doom in the main deck, and it aims to sort of like wipe out your opponent's beaters. But apparently that didn't do as well, as it did not make it to the top game. Given that the deck representation in this tournament was so uniform, it's hard to draw like too many conclusions about how the metagame actually stacks up, especially since there are only 16 people playing in the tournament. I mean, the main conclusion is that, like, you know, Tomato Control is the deck to beat, but it doesn't really say much about the decks below it. However, you know, while there isn't really too much to talk about with the results of this tournament, there were some great games that got played. So I actually have the replay of the final games in this tournament. So I'm going to just, you know, quickly do a commentary on them. I haven't actually watched them through myself, so I'm excited to do sort of like a blind reaction to them. But it should be a lot of fun and should provide a great tease at what Android format looks like and how fun it can be. So let's dive into those games and see how they go. Okay, we've got the finals here with GBO and Kesha as the final 2 duelists. I was planning on initially like live streaming this match when it happened, but there's a lot of chaos sort of surrounding the exact schedule of the match, and so I missed actually being able to live stream it. But, you know, this is like the next best thing, kind of. So I am going to hide both of the hands, so that way we don't quite know what each of them is playing with, and that should hopefully add a bit more surprise to the games. So this is going to be the match that they played where, you know, this tournament was double elimination. So Kesha had lost a game in this tournament and had won the loser's bracket. and GBO had been undefeated up to this point. So at this point in the tournament, if GBO wins this game, they win the whole tournament. But if Kesha wins, then they haven't won the whole tournament, as they still have to face GBO again and win there. So we'll see what happens. But at this point, it is kind of in GBO's favor to win the tournament. So let's see if they actually do. Kesha's going to open with a Pot of Greed, which is extremely good. And they follow that up with a Painful Choice, which is another extremely good card here. They're going to send 3 Hand Rips, a Jar of Greed, and a Skull Lair. I think this is really good. The Hand Rips get a lot worse as the game goes on, so it's great to sort of like deck thin by sending them with Painful, and also providing 3 very powerful options that your opponent really doesn't want to give you. Skull Lair is also very good at this juncture if they actually get it, as, you know, Kesha now has like 6 cards in the graveyard to banish off of it. And at this point in the game, Skull Lair didn't have its errata that you'd only have to remove from play monsters from your graveyard. So you could actually banish any type of card from your graveyard, which makes it a very powerful removal tool in this format. And, you know, Jar of Greed is easily the least powerful of these 5, but it is good at just, like, digging deeper into your deck and potentially baiting out spell and trap removal. So I think these are some very powerful choices off of the Painful. Let's see what GBO gives them. They're actually going to give them the Skull Lair, and that, to me, implies that they may have spell and trap removal in hand, as, you know, if you've got, like, a Mystical Space Typhoon to chain to a Skull Lair activation, then you can get rid of it and potentially banish some cards from your opponent's graveyard if they do pay the cost of it. So Kesha's just going to T-set and pass. You know, that set may be Skull Lair, or it could be something else to sort of throw GBO off the scent, but I guess we'll just have to find out. GBO is going to fire Raigeki early, and it pays off for them. Mystic Tomato is a very powerful card turn 1, and it's good just to sort of get it out of rotation. In Android format, some of the typical recruiters like Sanguine Witch are limited, so it makes it a little bit less likely that your opponent's going to open up with a set Sanguine or Witch. So the first turn Raigeki play can be pretty powerful. GBO is also going to bring out a Gemini Elf here and try attacking in. Catch is going to activate Skull Lair and try banishing 4 to get rid of that Gemini Elf. But GBO has Mystical Space Typhoon for the Skull Lair, so they will be able to pop it. And, you know, this makes sense why they picked it. Kesha's going to take that 19. GBO is going to just set 3 and pass. I guess I mean, they don't need to play around hand rips, but I guess they're just like, Kesha doesn't have heavy, you know. If Kesha does have heavy, then that's really bad here, but... oh, okay. Imperial Order actually makes a lot of sense. So they were kind of insulated from a heavy. So they're going to activate IO to potentially stop this Dark Hole from destroying the Gemini Elf. But Kesha does have a Mystical Space Typhoon for the Imperial Order. So this will be able to go through. Kesha's going to bring out a Gemini Elf of their own and attack into GBO for 19 and pass back. GBO really needs a monster here as they've only got spells and traps, it looks like. They're going to fire a Forceful Sentry, and that will go through. So we will get to see that Kesha has a Mystical Space Typhoon, Raigeki, and Jinzo here. This is a bit of a tricky choice for GBO, as, you know, they don't have monsters on field yet. So the Raigeki isn't too powerful for Kesha right now, but if they ever do manage to commit monsters to board, then the Raigeki can be a problem. And if they leave the Jinzo in hand, then Kesha can just tribute over the Gemini Elf for a Jinzo and make GBO's potential back row dead. So this is a very tough choice. I'm not really sure what they're going to pick, and it looks like they're going to think about this for a bit. And they're actually going to put back the Mystical Space Typhoon. That's very interesting. And it's a little bit telling. So this to me implies that they may have a Skull Lair set that they want to actually fire. Oh, they're just going to fire Fisher. Okay, so this prevents Kesha from being able to bring out Jinzo. And they don't have any monsters here, so this makes sense. They don't want Kesha to just fire the MST on the lone back row there. Kesha did apparently draw monsters, so they're going to set that and pass back to GBO. GBO is going to set another. This is a perfect time for Jinzo to come down. Oh, wow, they're going to flip up Magician of Faith first. That makes sense. GBO is actually going to fire a Torrential Tribute on that to prevent Kesha from being able to bring out Jinzo, which, you know, makes sense. And Kesha's going to add back a Pot of Greed, which is incredibly powerful here. So they're going to fire the Pot of Greed, draw 2, bring out a Kaiku, which is probably one of the best draws they could have gotten in this game, deal 18, and be able to banish 2 cards from GBO's graveyard. So they're going to banish the Gemini Elf and the Raigeki, 2 very good ones. Kesha's going to set another pass back to GBO. GBO's just going to set another pass back to Kesha. So it looks like, you know, they're just not drawing monsters, which is pretty brutal in this format. Kesha's just going to fire an MST on that back row there. It's a trap hole. They're going to attack in for 18, set another pass back to them. I think they're leaving the Kaiku on field because if GBO does top deck like a Bazoo, then Bazoo could actually get over Jinzo. But this way, you know, with Kaiku on field, GBO can't banish. So, you know, it plays a bit around that. GBO does draw Pot of Greed, which is pretty great. Kesha does have the IO for it, but GBO has the Mystical Space Typhoon for the IO. So, you know, they will be able to draw 2 here. This could potentially turn the game around. They're going to fire a Painful Choice, and let's see what they send. This is a really painful choice, as, you know, they need to find some way to out the Kaiku here, depending on what they have in hand. They're going to think a bit about this for a bit, and it is a very tough one, so it makes sense. And they're going to send a Gemini Elf, Fisher, Dark Hole, and Reborn. So those are all very good ones that all clear Kaiku in their own way. So I think this makes a lot of sense. And Kesha's got to make a pretty tough decision here. They're going to give back the Gemini Elf. Makes sense given that, you know, we know that Kesha does have a Raigeki here to clear the Elf. So it's still, like, not quite in GBO's favor, but this at least enables them to, like, claw back a bit into the game. Kesha has Snatch Steal, actually, so that is just very likely going to sign the end of the game. They're going to attack in with Jinzo, dropping GBO down to 100, setting another pass back. And, you know, GBO is still alive, but we know Kesha has Raigeki, and if they just have a monster plus Raigeki, that probably will just be the end of the game. GBO is going to set 2, pass back to Kesha. Kesha's going to fire that Raigeki, and that will just be the end of the game. So, you know, very interesting game one. Very fast-paced with a lot of big beaters, but also very skillful, I think. GBO got a bit unlucky not drawing many monsters there. So let's see if that changes in game 2. And also let's see if they actually, like, make any siding changes to the decks. I'm not sure really what siding changes you would make, as Good Stuff or Tomato Control, as it's known, is pretty much the top deck in the format that every deck is prepared for in the main. But, you know, maybe they've got some slight changes here. GBO's going first, though. They're just going to start out with a normal summoned Kaiku, set 1, pass back. So if Kesha does have a Gemini Elf, they may be able to clear this. And they are going to think about it. They're actually going to Change of Heart the Kaiku, activate Pot of Greed, and summon another Kaiku. They're just going to get in for 3,600. That's a lot of damage there. And then they're going to fire a Delinquent Duo just to keep the advantage going. They're going to discard a Premature Burial, which is very good, and apparently another copy of Kaiku. They're just going to set 1 and pass the Kaiku back to GBO. I guess they're getting aggressive really early on in the game. They must not have a Jinzo to tribute off for it. So, very interesting though. GBO is going to bring out Bazoo, which doesn't actually help against the Kaiku, but it won't even matter anyways because Kesha does have the Trap Hole. And they're going to fire a Fisher to just get in here for 18 with the Kaiku, and also banish 2 cards from Kesha's grave. They're going to banish the Pot of Greed and the Kaiku, which makes a lot of sense, as those are the 2 most powerful cards in the grave that can be recurred. They're going to set 1, pass back to Kesha. Kesha's going to bring out a Gemini Elf that will get Trap Hold, so GBO is still in a pretty good position despite being down on cards. They're going to attack in with Kaiku, banish another 2 from the grave, and set another, pass back to Kesha. And Kesha's going to fire a Snatch Steal, summon out a Bazoo, not using Prio, but if this does connect and Kesha does banish, I mean, I guess they'd have to only banish 2, so you won't be able to get them down quite to like 100, but it's still very, very brutal here. They are going to fire that, banish 2, get it up to 2,200, and attack in for 4,000 damage, which is pretty brutal. And also, you know, the attack boost on the Bazoo will remain in effect for the next turn. So, it's pretty brutal. GBO will gain 1,000 from the Snatch Steal, which is pretty good for them. But honestly, you know, there's not much they can do here. They've got a Snatch Steal of their own for the Bazoo. It looks like they're going to sack that off for a Jinzo, which makes sense. They're going to attack in to the Kaiku, deal 600, and pass back to Kesha. So GBO's like own traps are turned off if that is a trap, but honestly, this is a very good position. Kesha's already used up Snatch Steal and a Change of Heart, so, you know, not too many punches to this. Dark Hole will remove it, though. So quite unfortunate there. And Kesha's going to bring out a Masked Sorcerer and try attacking in for 900. And they will be able to get a draw here, which can be pretty brutal for GBO. Kesha's going to fire a Painful Choice now. And this is a bit of a thinker for them, it seems like. There are a lot of good options here, so we'll just have to see what they get. And they're going to send a bunch of good ones. The Reborn, Call of the Haunted, and Cannon Soldier kind of just represent lethal on board, so GBO can't really give them any of those. But the Mirror Force can insulate the Masked Sorcerer a bit, and the Torrential can also stop GBO from making any offensive pressure. So I think the choice here is probably the Torrential, but it's a very tough one. Oh, they're going to give back the Mirror Force. I mean, that makes sense as well. If you've got, like, Spawn Trap removal for it, then that's not bad. They're going to fire a Pot of Greed here, and they're going to think about exactly what to do. They're going to bring out a Kaiku, set 1 and pass. So they know about the Mirror Force, so they're not attacking, which makes sense. Kesha is going to set 2, switch the mask to defense mode, and pass back. GBO is going to try attacking in with the Kaiku. That will get Mirror Forced, but... oh, I guess they've got Dark Hole to clear the Masked Sorcerer. I thought they might have potentially been bringing out another monster there. But, you know, that makes sense. If Kesha doesn't draw a monster here, then GBO is fine. They do draw a Witch, though, and that will just be the end of the game. Looks like these were just 2 dead spells here. So, you know, match 1 goes to Kesha, which means that both Kesha and GBO have lost 1 game in this tournament. So they will be going on to the finals here. So this will just be another rematch between them, but it should potentially be a good one. I thought that these games were pretty fun to watch. So let's see how the second match goes. Okay, we've got the second match here, and it looks like we're going to open up with some intense rock, paper, scissors. And GBO will win the RPS. So they will likely be going first here, which may give them the edge that they need to actually win the game. It is very intense. Now the playing ground is kind of evened out between the two of them. They're just going to do the classic, well, I guess not T-set, but, you know, set a monster and then set a bunch of back row and pass. They probably have like an IO set, just because Imperial Order can stop something like Heavy Storm, or they just figure, you know, Kesha probably doesn't play Heavy Storm. But Kesha is going to mirror their move, just setting a monster, setting 4, and passing. So a bit of a slower start than last game. GBO is going to flip up a Mystic Tomato and try attacking into that set there. Kesha does have the Mirror Force, which does make sense, as Mystic Tomato can be really annoying. GBO is just going to bring out another Mystic Tomato, though, pass back to Kesha. And Kesha's going to bring out a Mystic Tomato of their own. So it looks like that they're just going to crash between them. And likely to send all the tomatoes from their deck to grave. Unclear what they'll end on, but it will be very interesting to see. I think this is, yeah, that was GBO's last tomato, so they're going to bring out a Witch. Kesha probably has one more, and it seems like they do. So they will be able to clear the Witch. GBO will get a search here, and there are some very powerful beaters they can search. They're going to bring out a Kaiku, which makes sense. And Kesha's going to pass back to GBO. They're going to bring out a Kaiku, probably try attacking over that tomato, banishing some cards from grave. And it looks like that is indeed what they're going to do. So they'll be able to banish the 2 other tomatoes in grave. Kesha's going to bring out a Witch, which makes sense. They can use Witch to search out something like Gemini Elf, which can potentially clear the Kaiku, which would be nice. And it looks like they're going to flip up this Cannon Soldier here. Tribute off the Witch, search out an Elf, and try and get over that Kaiku. GBO does have the Trap Hole to deal with that, which is a bit unfortunate. And we know that Kesha has already used up a Mirror Force. So, you know, they won't necessarily be able to stop the attack of the Kaiku unless they're playing something like a Magic Cylinder or like a Woboku to protect the Cannon Soldier. But it looks like they are going to Reborn Gemini Elf. GBO is going to change Imperial Order because that will potentially stop this from going through. But Kesha does have the Mystical Space Typhoon to chain to the Imperial Order. So they will be able to get in here potentially. And it looks like GBO does have Mirror Force, so that will be able to clear their monsters. So GBO's in a pretty good position here. Kesha will activate Delinquent Duo, which will remove the last couple cards from their hand. But GBO does have a powerful monster on board to keep getting in on the offensive here. Those were 2 very good discards, though. Gemini Elf and Bazoo would both have been pretty problematic for Kesha. And it looks like Kesha's going to draw 2 off of a double Jar of Greed, which kind of shows how powerful Jar of Greed can be in this format. Even if you're not using it to bait out spell and trap removal, getting draws can be very useful. GBO is going to attack in with the Kaiku, so that will be able to banish 2 cards from Kesha's grave and pass back to Kesha. Kesha does have a Gemini Elf, so they'll be able to summon that out and try clearing the Kaiku, and that will indeed go through. They're going to pass back to GBO, who has a Kaiku and probably some way to deal with the Elf. They've got Fisher, but Kesha does have Io, so, you know, kind of unfortunate. Kesha will have to pay 700 to keep the Io online here, but they're doing pretty well, and there isn't much that GBO can really draw here to deal with the combination of Gemini Elf Kaiku, as any Bazoo would be stopped by the Kaiku, and if they draw Gemini Elf, you know, that can just crash with Kesha's Gemini Elf. So a bit rough for GBO, but they do indeed have the Elf, so they will be able to at least try and clear the Kaiku here. That will go through. Kesha will take 100. GBO will set 1, pass back to Kesha, and Kesha will let the Io die here. They're going to Heavy Storm that back row and bring out a Bazoo, and this is really rough for GBO, as now Kesha has two very powerful beaters, and GBO is just in top deck mode. So very rough, very unlikely that GBO will be able to claw their way back here, but there are some powerful spells that do it. Apparently that was not one of them, and this could just potentially be the end of the game. GBO has used up a Mirror Force, so it's very unlikely that, you know, they'll be able to actually protect against this. And they're just going to try attacking in. Yep, that was just a Torrential Tribute, so that will just be the end of the game. So pretty intense game 1 of that final match. Kesha was able to pull it out, but, you know, both duelists, you know, went back and forth there. They both played it very well. So we'll see what happens in game 2 here, if GBO will be able to bring this to a game 3, or if Kesha will win a very decisive victory here, going pretty much 4-0 against GBO. We'll just have to watch and see. GBO will again be going first here. And they open with a Forceful, which is incredibly good. We'll get to see Kesha's hand, and we see that Kesha has a Forceful of their own, but they've also got 2 very powerful sort of Power 5 spells, Raigeki and Change of Heart, both of which are insane. Mass Sorcerer is a decent monster, especially if you can pair it with a Raigeki or Change of Heart to get in for some damage. But honestly, you know, I feel like you want to take one of the power spells here. Oh, they're taking back the Mass Sorcerer. I guess because they want to cut Kesha off from monsters. But I don't know. There's just some very powerful other spells in Kesha's hand. I mean, maybe GBO has like an Imperial Order, so it's less of an issue for them. But very interesting pick. I'm curious to see how this pays off for them. GBO is just going to set 3 and pass. So hopefully they've set the powerful cards in hand if, you know, Kesha's going to fire Forceful, and they will indeed fire Forceful. Looks like GBO did indeed have the Io, which makes their Mass Sorcerer put back make a lot more sense. They are going to pay 700 to keep that Io online. Bring out a Kaiku, flip up Sangan, and just attack in for 2,800 here, which is a fair amount of damage. Not much to banish from the grave, but honestly, you know, that's good enough. Kesha's just going to draw, pass back to GBO. GBO is again going to pay, which makes sense. Kesha has some very powerful spells in hand. And GBO is going to attack in for another 28. So, you know, Kesha's on the 1-turn clock. If they don't draw something here to help them out in the situation, they just lose. So this game could be over very quickly. Kesha does have a Gemini Elf, though, so they are able to bring that out, potentially attack over the Kaiku. And GBO will take 100 from that. Kesha's going to set 1. Very likely the Call of the Haunted to bring back Elf if GBO does have a way to get around it. But GBO is going to pay the 7 to keep the Imperial Order online, which makes sense. They're going to bring out a Gemini Elf, switch the Sangan to defense, crash the Elves in here, and just set 1 and pass. I guess they switch the Sangan into defense, as they know that Kesha can just Call the Haunted back the Elf. But I think there is an argument to potentially attacking in with the Sangan, as, you know, you force the activation of the call immediately. And you prevent Kesha from being able to use it on something like a Jinzo later on. But I think this is a fine move. GBO is going to bring out a Mystic Tomato, attack into the Sangan, and GBO will get a search, so they're going to grab a Magician of Faith, which is a bit of an interesting one given that they've got Io up. But I guess we'll just have to see how it pans out for them. They're going to draw, let the Io expire, Dark Hole the Mystic Tomato away, bring out a Witch, attack in for 11, but Kesha does have the call. GBO does have the Mystical Space Typhoon, though, so they will be able to clear that. So they're going to attack in for 11, and Kesha is back in dire straits here. We know that they've got like a Raigeki and a Change of Heart, but neither of those are really that good against a Witch. And it looks like they're going to think a bit about this. because they are in a very tough spot. They do have a reborn here, and GBO is on the magic drain, which is pretty awesome. There are ways around it. Kesha does have some other spells in hand that we know about that they can discard, and they will indeed discard a confiscation, which makes sense, not really as useful right now. But still, that's a very interesting tech card here. I'm not sure how I like it. I think Magic Jammer might just be a little bit better in my opinion, but it still is really cool to see a card like that see play. They will be able to pull off the reborn here, bring back Mystic Tomato, and attack into that Witch of the Black Forest, which can search something good, and they are going to search out a Bazoo, which will be able to deal potentially 1100 damage against this Tomato. Kesha's going to set one, pass back to GBO. GBO is going to bring out that Bazoo and banish a bunch here. They're going to think about whether to banish 3 or not, and they are just going to go for it. I think that makes sense. They've got plenty of monsters in graveyard. So they're going to attack into the Tomato here, drop Kesha down to 200 to a point where they're in a lot of danger here. And Kesha is going to bring out a Cannon Soldier, which makes sense, gets a bit of damage in. If they've got something like Change of Heart, which we do know that they have, this can clear the Bazoo. But GBO is going to set one, pass back to Kesha. And Kesha is going to summon out Gemini Elf and fire the Change. GBO does have the Magic Drain for this, so if Kesha's last card in hand is not a spell, then this is fine. But I think we do know it's a Raigeki, and it is indeed a Raigeki. So that will just be the end of the game, as, you know, this is 25 plus 19 plus 14, and then Cannon Soldier contribute off everything else. So, yeah, this is just GG. But a very, very intense one. I think, honestly, all these games were awesome. Very, very cool things to see. Just seeing the dynamic between the 3 beat sticks is really cool, and that's something that I'm going to talk about a lot when I get to Android format. Having Bazoo be able to out Gemini Elf be able to out Kaiku, and Kaiku be able to out Bazoo is a really neat sort of triangle that I think adds a lot of charm to the format. So it's cool to see that pop up in these games here. It's also cool to see interesting techs like Magic Drain. I think Magic Drain's flaws were sort of on full display in this final game here, as, you know, if this was something like a Magic Jammer or a Solemn Judgment, you know, GBO could have potentially negated something like Change of Heart and survived, but unfortunately it didn't work out like that, and so that will just be the end of the game. But very good ones, very well fought by each duelist, and I hope that you enjoyed them as much as I did. But that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed as always. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about these final matches and what you think about Android format in general. I'm excited to eventually reach it, but before then, I'm going to be diving into PSV and Imperial format, both of which should be a pretty fun time. So I look forward to covering that, and until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.